and welcome back to my channel. Today I would like to talk to you about my personal pedagogy, which I call the Inquisitive Approach. I've spoken to you about Waldorf, Montessori, Reggio Emilia, and unschooling, which are all philosophies that have inspired me, but I've looked for ways to take these philosophies and put them together into one cohesive thing. So I've looked at what do these philosophies have in common, and then what are some of my other just beliefs that I believe are really important. And I've created my own philosophy out of that. The reason I call it the Inquisitive Approach is because at its core, it's about following the inquisitiveness of children, what they're interested in and curious about, and cultivating that curiosity, that inquisitiveness, cultivating it and encouraging it. And that is something that you see is important in Waldorf, Montessori, Reggio Emilia, and unschooling. Just cultivating that curiosity. They do it in different ways, but all of them do it. So some of the key important things to my philosophy are that it should be intentional. This is something that you see, all of the things are very intentional. They all have different ways of being intentional, but they're all thought out and specifically designed with child development in mind. So I think you need to have some knowledge about child development when you're designing a pedagogy, and it needs to be intentional. It needs to be thought out, not just like, oh, this seems fun, but like an actually thought out plan. Even if that plan is unschooling, even if that plan is to just follow the child's interests, there's an intentionality there. And I think that's the first thing that you see in all of these philosophies. The next is hands-on. So, and that this is also where I would talk about that inquisitiveness, following their curiosity, being interest-led. So some just do that, like Waldorf just does that by making curriculum based off of child development, based off of the knowledge of what children tend to be curious about at different ages and stages, and then doing that in a hands-on curriculum way. Others, like Montessori, actually let the child pick from the shelf, or you have unschooling where you're completely letting the child control and go off their own curiosity. But in all cases, there is that acknowledgement of following the child's interest in some degree or another and making hands-on activities that engage the senses. Next is joy. Childhood should be a joyful time. I think often it's not, because it is a time of big emotions and working through tantrums and new understanding and stuff. But I think it can be a time if we kind of put some of our battles back and pick and choose our battles and have less battles with our kids and let them make more choices and let them I'm saying this from the perspective of an educator. I don't have children myself, but I work with children. And I'm saying I think that we can have more joy if we slow down and make more room to follow the child's interests. And, you know, they're interested in a butterfly, and we're not in a rush all the time to get somewhere. Some days we'll have to be in a rush and we won't have time to look at the butterfly. And on those days, we just can't cultivate joy in the same way. And you have to pick your battles, and there are some things you need to get to on time. But there has to be other times where you can just slow down and look at the worms on the walk to wherever you're going and cultivate that joy. I think is a really important thing in childhood, and something that I see in all of these pedagogies is this idea that childhood can be beautiful and enjoyable. And then environmentally friendly, that's a big one. That's where you'll see a lot of like wooden toys in a lot of these, or wooden materials, because they're trying to be environmentally friendly, and they're also trying to offer different textures, cloth and wood and different materials, so it's not just always plastic, but definitely trying to steer away from plastic for environmental reasons and trying to teach children that stewardship of the environment. That's something big that you'll see in Montessori, Waldorf, Reggio Emilia, and unschooling. Next is aesthetic. So these are beautiful philosophies. There's like, you can go on Instagram or Pinterest and like look at some of these things, and you'll see beautiful playrooms, beautiful shelves full of beautiful toys. And like, I don't think you have to get materialistic about it and need all the things. I think you can, DIY things and buy things used, but still have that I'm setting up this environment intentionally for it to be beautiful for my children, because I think that inspires their creativity and helps their learning to have these beautiful environments. That maybe sounds silly, but that's something you see a lot in Montessori and Waldorf and Reggio Emilia, and I think it is important. Next is being respectful. So this idea of gentle parenting or respectful approach is something that you see a lot of in these more alternative pedagogies. And I think it's so important to be mindful of the way that we talk to children, and that to acknowledge that, timeouts, yelling, spanking, they don't work. These are flawed things that just don't work, and we need a slower, I'm still learning. I'm reading a book called Hunt, Gather, Parent, which is really good on like a more gentle approach to parenting and discipline. But I'm still learning how to do that as an educator. But I think that's a really important thing that you see in all of these pedagogies, and that I put in my own pedagogy. Next is the arts. In Montessori and Waldorf, there's huge emphasis on art, as well as in Reggio Emilia, where it talks about the 100 languages of a child and expressing themselves in all different ways. I think encouraging artistic, creative expression is so important, and I think that's a huge part of my pedagogy. Next is gross motor. This is something you do see in Montessori, and you see in Waldorf, and you see in Reggio Emilia. It's not a huge part, but it is there in all of these things. But I think it's a huge part of my own personal philosophy, just because the observations I've made in childcare is that there's not enough gross motor play. Children want to climb, they want to spin, they want to run, and we're always telling them to sit and listen and engage, and with like fine motor activities and storytelling and stuff like that, music time, but they need opportunities to dance and run and swirl and tumble. And I think it's super important. This is a huge part of my philosophy, is that we need to make gross motor a priority. Next is practical life. This you'll see very much in Montessori, but also in Waldorf and a little bit in Reggio Emilia, where they talk about the child being capable. And I think it's just so important to teach children how to do practical life stuff, like help you with the laundry, get their own snack, put their own clothes on, because that's what they want. They want to be independent, and it gives them this really great feeling about themselves, and it reduces tantrums, and it gives you eventually less to do because they can help themselves and do things themselves for the first little bit while you're working with them on it or waiting for them to try. It's going to be really frustrating, but the payoff is there eventually when they can do it themselves. And it's really great that you don't have to, put their shoes on every time their shoe comes off, because they can do it themselves now. Just speaking from an educator who has like 8 children at a time, when they can put their own shoes on, it's great. And then the last point in my pedagogy is emotional and social literacy. This is, I see it a bit in some of these other pedagogies, but I think this is more just something that I'm like, okay, this is important to me from my education that I had. And it kind of ties back in with gentle parenting. I think if you teach children about their emotions and help them be social beings and know how to engage and play, you're going to cut down on a lot of behaviors. And so you're going to have a lot less disciplining that needs doing. Prevention. And I think emotional social literacy is a huge part of that. So those are just the key points of my philosophy, which I am calling the Inquisitive Approach, and I'm actually trying to write a book about it. I know that's probably a little bit, I don't know, like silly to think that I can make my own pedagogy, but whatever. We all have our own pedagogy, really. Like, you all take little bits and pieces from other places, and you have what you believe and what you do, and I'm just trying to put a name to mine and flesh it out.